Hello and welcome to Muse and Metrics. This is your host, Philippa Burgess. I'm here with another wonderful guest.
Hello, my name is Lilinoe Harbottle, and I am a Women Techmakers Ambassador.
I love it. So let's start there. How long have you been an ambassador?
So I recently joined the Women Techmakers Ambassadors program this year, and it was through referral from you. I've been, fairly new to the Women Techmakers program, but I've been following their webinars, attending a lot of their in-person events whenever they do offer those opportunities here in the Bay Area. And I feel like it's such a wonderful opportunity to learn, to meet fellow women in tech, to gain that sense of community when oftentimes in the technical space, we might be individual contributors and we might not find that, community yet. So it's just an amazing space to learn, to grow, to also find opportunity to mentor others and sort of bring more diverse perspectives into the conversation.
But I want to start with your background as a data scientist, because that's sort of where we met. Is you were very established as a data scientist and then started to, as I did too in my studies as a graduate student in data science, realizing we need to secure that data. And so I think we also sort of share that common interest. But yeah, just a little bit of background on how did you get to your interest in data science, your training, and your professional experience there?
Wonderful question. So I definitely had a non-linear journey from school. I studied applied math in college. And so normally what we think is, okay, I'm going to graduate, I'm going to become a teacher. And I tried that. It was interesting. And I developed this more, stronger interest in data science. I felt like that resonated a little bit more with where I wanted to go in my career. So I, went through several startup companies where I worked both as a data scientist, as a program manager. I worked at larger companies, and there was always this underlying theme of data analytics. And what happened is that over time, I realized that not just one, but two cybersecurity incidents had occurred in different locations, not related to me, but it did impact me as an employee in these companies. And I started to think, okay, nobody wants to hear about a problem without having a way to kind of fix it, right? And we want to know, okay, what can we do as individual contributors to really ensure that, for one, our data is secure, because that does impact our data analysis. It impacts everyone in the company, and it impacts the future of the company. And so I took this as, okay, maybe this is a sign from the universe. I'm going to start, gradually moving into this space, because I feel like as the field of data science is evolving with cloud computing, we do have a stronger need for the data resiliency. And that's sort of how I gradually move towards this interest in, okay, now I want to work on my cybersecurity certifications. I want to volunteer and go to different cybersecurity events so that I can learn more about not just the language, but the current trends in industry, and understand what data governance means in this international context with every day these cybersecurity reports of this threat and that threat. And I'm trying to figure out, where do we fit in as women in tech, and how do we ensure that this space is welcoming for more perspectives?
So I'm curious what led you to applied math, because I have a math dad. My dad did engineering and accounting and economics. And so I grew up with a very strong math interest from my home, but I always felt like academically I was very tracked into the arts. And so I'm always inspired and interested with people who pursued or got tracked into STEM.
So that's so funny that you brought that up. My dad is actually an artist, a needlepoint artist. And so here I'm a mathematician, and I was actually never tracked into the arts. My dad was very clear to try to gear your next stage in your career towards something that you can apply towards, something. What type of work would you like to do when you graduate? And so it's really funny. I found myself in school surrounded by a lot of brilliant people, and for me, mathematics was just easy. It was like breathing. I didn't have to work and struggle. I felt like it naturally worked for me. And it did very much have to do with the fact that I had 3 older siblings. They were more into the computers, and I sort of followed them along. My sister is a computer scientist. And so it made sense I would go into that more technical track, but I didn't want to be an engineer like them. I had to be different. So I chose math just to be a little bit rebellious, but still in that same category. And I felt like, one, it was interesting being one of the few women in the class. You know, you'd be in a lecture hall with 400 men and it would be programming and be one of 10 women. So I'd sit in the front to make sure I didn't get, lost in the shuffle. And it was definitely interesting because even back then we realized, okay, this is going to be the future of my career. I wanted to be women in the company. And I was so lucky because I was able to pinpoint one or two mentors who would sort of shine the light of, okay, this is what it's like in this career. This is what you can do to move forward. Because having my dad be an artist, it's very different. Obviously, the mentality about education is, very much pro-education, but at the same time, what are you going to do when you graduate? What kind of job are you going to get? Are you going to be a teacher? All those questions kind of came at me. And so when I did graduate, okay, I thought I'm going to get my master's because then I can be a teacher. And I did that. I tried that. And it was interesting, but to be a teacher, especially in California, they call you a freeway flyer. You're going to have to work at 3 different community colleges or schools to make, just a living wage to support yourself. And so that was very enlightening. I thought, okay, maybe I'm going to try working at a startup because at least I don't have to work at 3 different jobs, which made sense at the time. And so I found myself trapped into the less technical spaces at the startup. So they realized, hey, you're very good with managing multiple projects. Why don't you become a program manager? I said, okay, sure, I'm adaptable. I started as a researcher, data scientist, but I don't mind picking up this extra, task, filling out legal paperwork, HR paperwork, dealing with so-and-so accountants. Sure. And so I feel like I've seen a lot of women who started out as engineers moved into this program management type of space, which is wonderful for those who want to go into management or maybe get their MBA later. But I find it interesting that I started out as a more technical person, and I was hoping to stay in that space. And so now I'm looking at my career and thinking I can still pivot because I know I learned some skills that are extremely transferable and hopefully can share my stories so that others make decisions that they feel like, okay, this is true to who I am and where I want to go in my career.
I really appreciate that. And I think just having that self-awareness, and because I didn't have it till much later, of even understanding the word tracked, that there are these external forces, and especially for women that do kind of want us to go in certain directions and to come back to our inner strength and our inner core and that authenticity to ourselves. And I think for me, that was one of the reasons I went back to graduate school, is I had been so tracked that I'd gotten myself to a dead end. And I was like, if I'm getting a position based on my resume, I can only be hired for one thing. And I need to really reinvent my resume and really add to my skills, but I didn't know where to start. And I think one of the challenges is that without that math background, with this sort of arts or softer skills background, it's actually challenging to get into a technical track, to even find that starting point. So I went with urban planning, which to me seemed like a very vanilla, I didn't really know what was in the urban planning package, but I was like, okay, that sounds interesting. And I think my background can definitely communicate that I can be a good student here. And I was, and I love the fact that we did a lot of financials. And I love the fact that we did a lot of economics and politics and sort of deep economics, and then got into the data science and the data visualization. And that was where I just shined, because as soon as we got into I was clearly the only person in my class, my cohort, that was in love with programming and was in love with, I was like, oh, I forgot like how much I love programming, because even though I'd gone into marketing, I had always coded. I'd always built things. And I mean, from the time I was first discovered HTML, I was like, oh, I like this. I can put up a website. And this was like in my freshman year of college. But then I think you and I also, and I think being part of Google and just our own interests, and you sort of, well, you're kind of in the home territory for tech, being in the Bay Area, also have an interest in AI and machine learning. And that's just another way of working with data.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that background about how you journeyed, because I feel like a lot of our experiences do contribute to where we are today and why we want to be part of the Women Techmakers community. And I feel like my experience with data back in the day, it wasn't called data science. It was just analysis. We kept it very simple. We didn't have these fancy terms. And today, looking back at the work, it would be closer to what we call now machine learning. So the field itself is changing in terms of the language and the terms that we use, but I feel like it made sense. I like to solve problems. I like to do a little bit of that quiet individual work. When I'm in the flow, I could keep coding and keep working through problems and just be happy creating and analyzing. And I feel like now that I've seen so many examples of how what we call AI/algorithms have been used in industry, I feel like we're at this moment where we have so many opportunities to, one, keep analyzing, keep solving problems that are applicable to, for example, healthcare. And I saw an amazing example in one of my past experiences at Johnson & Johnson, where what we call AI used to be called just algorithms, computer algorithms back in the day. And so I was very lucky because I was able to work with some very brilliant people who they would take images, either MRI or CT scans, and use that to create 3D models of the human lungs. And so we call this AI now. And there are so many debates about the pros and cons about AI, but I feel like this is one of those unsung heroes, and it's been around for over 7+ years, of how we can use some of this artificial intelligence technology to help surgeons make better decisions and help doctors improve their performance in the operating room. And so it's not the end result, it's a small piece of the larger puzzle for healthcare, but it's really important because it doesn't get as much buzz as ChatGPT, for example, or it doesn't get as much publicity as Mandiant and their cybersecurity awareness efforts. But it's very helpful in the sense that it is to improve patient lives and patient safety. And I was thinking about this, where sometimes you'll have different industries who are working in their own space on specific AI/algorithms, and they have very particular use cases. For example, data science in medical care is going to be subject to all of the HIPAA regulations, the cybersecurity restrictions, every single layer of complexity that you can think possible. And then that's not including the fact that if it's in the cloud, now you have another layer of restrictions and all these other balances and permissions and passwords. Everything adds up where you have to understand about 10 layers of complexity just to analyze your data. So you think that, yes, I studied how to be a data scientist in school. No, there's highly contextual, and there's so many controls and systems in place to ensure the security of data. But even then, it's possible that a bad actor could, come around and kind of throw everyone off. And so it's really interesting that I like how there are so many conversations about data security and cybersecurity now. But I definitely felt like, okay, I've been very happy as a data scientist. They want to figure out how to do more and pivot into that proactive stance instead of just being on the receiving end as a data scientist looking at, okay, so this incident happened, and so now we have to do X, Y, Z. I wanted to do a little bit more and start educating myself. And it's very interesting because in that space, as you would guess, not as many women yet. And so that's why I feel like it's so important to have podcasts such as Muse and Metrics and spread this awareness.
I think that's something I get a little bit spoiled by, is because I surround myself with so many women in tech, women in cybersecurity, women in plus and geospatial, women in GIS, women tech makers. I have this amazing community and communities of women, and yet understanding in the real technical environments that women are such a minority in the spaces, oftentimes the only one in the room. and how we have to basically operate at a table we didn't build. So women have to sort of yield to the culture. And that's one thing I has come across in many conversations is, you know, the different roles that women play. In some ways, I see that women have 2 full-time jobs when they have families, and you know, they're the wife, they're the mom, they're the professional, and they're just juggling all these things. And I think some things is that women are the ones who are expected to take their kids to the doctor, for example. But that's not normalized in a male culture for men to do that, for men to get that kind of flexibility.
So many questions to pack right there. I feel like in California, we're very fortunate because something as simple as pay salary is transparent. And we have conversations outside of the formal space about salary negotiations. We have communities where we can talk about promotions for your career. And so we've created these systems around not having a seat at the table. We've created WESIS, we've created Women Techmakers. We have small spaces where we can have that dialogue, we can vent, we can talk about these types of issues. But I don't know yet about how we normalize, our levels of work-life balance for both men and women. I feel like I've heard so many conversations about women just trying to get that work-life balance when they negotiate their job offers. And it doesn't sit so well with some individuals, which is really unfortunate. And you would imagine San Francisco is going to be very forward-thinking, but I feel like it's still a growth process. And I don't have any solutions or answers for that one at the moment. But I think continuing the conversations is really important. And also, the least we can do is get that equal pay. If anything, we can share the knowledge of how we achieve this within our networks so that armed with these facts and this data, the statistics, we can negotiate our market value.
And I think more taking everything you said and then up leveling it, there's negotiating for the position that we feel that we've earned or we deserve. But, the statistics prove time and time again that a job listing is out there and a man who meets 50 to 60% of the qualifications will apply. And a woman will not apply unless she feels she meets 100% of what their wish list is. And so women don't even go for the higher paying jobs. They don't even apply. And so that's another thing that part of these conversations with women supporting women is to encourage people to say, keep going, keep growing. It's okay to put your hat in the ring for that position. And it's okay if you don't get it. Just keep going. Just keep applying for things and keep growing and extending yourself. I mean, part of, I'll call it DEI, and DEI I know has gotten politicized lately and there's been a lot of pushback against it. But in its most positive forms, I feel like it's so important to bring underrepresented both gender and culture, race, ethnicity, all of those, everything that has not been properly represented and given those opportunities. And so the programs that Google offers us, having gotten my Google Cloud Digital Leader, now doing the professional cloud architect, I would never have pursued those had they not said, hey, here's an opportunity. We want you as a woman to learn this. Go. And so DEI to me is not so much about, are you hiring the most qualified person for the job? It's you need to bring people and support them. But it also starts at the education and the training. So you have qualified people that you can then continue to invest in and grow. And so I'd love to get some of your thoughts on that, because you also represent diversity in being Indigenous, which brings a very unique perspective.
I think you got it right. I feel like by creating pathways where we can visualize our individual selves entering into that space, by, for example, this Cloud Digital Leader Certificate program and offering that type of scholarship, that type of opportunity is really important, because oftentimes we don't have that role model. Imagine if you're the only woman in the company, you don't have that role model. You don't see yourself quite being at that C-suite level. And we want to figure out how to create that leadership pipeline, but also, see where we're at. And I feel like because there aren't as many women role models in industry, also women of color in industry, it's a little hard. And I've seen sort of like a fatigue where you might have one woman who's mentoring 50 other women. Now she has a third, fourth job. And so I feel like there's that sort of double bind. So it's really inspiring that there are programs such as Women Techmakers, and they do offer these pathways, because now I have this tangible path that I can share with a colleague who is Indigenous, who is trying to figure out, how do I pivot into cybersecurity? I don't know where to start. And it's really important, because that one, it might seem like one scholarship or one small step, but that is, it really opened the doors for some other person. And that's going to open 5 more doors for people the next year. And it's going to keep growing until it becomes socialized and normalized, where yes, we can, because I know someone who tried it before me. And I think that awareness, the conversations, combined with having that opportunity available for the community, is so important.
Yes. And that's why I'm so grateful to be in these communities and in these spaces, and then also facilitate these conversations. I think actually you sort of touch on the project that I started as part of our International Women's Day campaign. So every year, Women Techmakers takes the first couple months of the year, pretty much for, the planning is sort of January, February, and then we kind of kick it off through March and April. And Women Techmakers are just invited to collaborate, invited to get out there and speak, plan events, do projects, anything that inspires them around a theme of the year. And so when I first joined I joined at the end of 2022. So my first Women Techmakers campaign was the 2023 season for International Women's Day, was Dare to Be. And that was actually the first time I invited guests onto my stage, and I decided to do a 5-hour audio summit where I interviewed 8 women tech makers, and they all helped me kind of find my voice and gain my confidence of having guests and putting something together where I think no one person felt put upon, because they're like, oh, I'm part of something. I'm part of a group. And so being part of a group, there's safety in that. And I really enjoyed putting it together. I was really, really proud of the deliverable. I met wonderful people. I made some new friends. I was like, this is great. I really, really, really enjoyed that. And then I went on and did another 5-hour audio summit as part of our Google I/O Extended, which happens after the annual conference in May. And then, and actually in that interview, one of the fellow tech maker ambassadors was all about cybersecurity. And that was when I was like, oh, I'm interested in that. Tell me more. And that was my first lean in. I almost feel like if I didn't have that conversation, so many other things would not have unfolded. And then I really got my confidence by the fall when I said, okay, let's do a season and invite a whole season of Women Techmaker ambassadors. And that's how this current show was born. And that led me to wanting to do this cybersecurity project. So I was in my cybersecurity law course, and because as I stepped into cybersecurity, I joined a lot of groups, and some of them were Facebook groups where I just kept seeing post after post after post of women saying, I've got my certification, I got my education, and I'm just lost. I just don't know what the next step is. And I wasn't seeing them get any useful answers. So I was like, well, why don't we put a mentorship together and they all come together and we can see if we can figure this out. I don't have the answer, but I figured we can figure it out. I know your experience, because this is how we met, is, you've been both a mentee, now you're a Women Techmakers ambassador, just, some of the things that you've seen me try to do as we've gone forward. And I feel like I've fallen a bit short because I moved and then got sick in September and then was just playing catch up with my school and my life for the better half. So I had bigger plans for what we were going to do for Cybersecurity Awareness Month, but I'm not done yet. I still have more things that I'm doing, but I just had this bigger idea. But I do find that so many women are just actually super shy, and they go into cybersecurity. So they're like, oh, I get to be quiet and not deal with people. So trying to kind of share with people it's okay to be seen, it's okay to be visible, it's okay to share your knowledge and your passion and build your community. But yeah, I'd love to get your take on sort of the experience.
I'm with you on that shyness aspect, and the fact that you brought in the more group mentoring element, it really speaks to the shy person inside of me, because it makes it a little bit more okay. It's easier to have a group mentoring session than a one-on-one. Absolutely. So I feel like, yes, I don't know how you do it, because you are managing multiple responsibilities. So I give you so much kudos right there. But I feel like, in terms of the mentoring aspect, I because I'm so introverted, I do well in the one-on-one mentoring space. It allows me the opportunity to really listen to someone, to understand their needs, and try to pose questions that helps further the conversation, helps further their path. And I feel like we all have different strengths. Some individuals are going to be great in group mentoring sessions where they can use different ideas from individuals and tie them together to a coherent, path. And so I feel like I love the variety, because as Women Techmakers ambassadors, we're going to have different approaches, and it just adds to what we're doing. And I like the fact that there is this support system among the different Women Techmakers, because we have monthly calls where we can share successes, but also get ideas of what we can do differently next time. And so I feel like there's just constant inspiration, a lot of energy, a lot of peer mentoring as well, where sometimes we envision mentoring to be someone who's very senior in a leadership or an executive position. But I really appreciate the peer mentoring, because then there's the sense of, I'm not the only one that is trying to figure out how to get into cybersecurity, right? I can talk to others, share ideas, share resources. I was very lucky. I met someone who was from the WSIS Silicon Valley chapter yesterday, and I mentioned the NIST NICE Ambassador Program. She's like, "When did this come up? Share me, send me the link." And I was like, "Of course, I'm more than happy to share this with you." And so I feel like peer mentoring, the sharing of ideas, just one, it's energizing. Two, it just creates this more deeper relationships among the different types of communities, because we're all doing amazing work in different spaces. And it's very nice to come together and just share ideas across the board.
Yeah. And I think you actually, when you talk about being a mentee and being a mentor, I love that you're speaking very powerfully, very strongly from being a mentor, as opposed to when we met, you were a mentee, and you have just completely, evolved and graduated and are like, yep, I'm good. I'm in that leadership role now. And I love that. That is the greatest joy that I can get from like what my idea was to see how I could be an opportunity hunter and just share things I see. And so I think I had shared with you, hey, apply to be a Women Techmakers ambassador. Hey, there's the NICE cybersecurity career ambassador. So that has been my main goal, was just to sort of find these opportunities and share them. And with that, to see that level of growth is amazing, and just your leadership. And so when I was first starting with this idea one-on-one, I happily and readily met with everybody and gave them, got to know them, and kind of gave any insight I could on their journey. But it was comparing them with other people. That's where I was getting sort of lost, because I enjoy the role of mentorship, and also enjoy the role of being a mentee. I did a peer mentorship program through Women Plus in Geospatial last year, and now I'm doing the WSIS as both a mentor and a mentee. So it's fun to sort of see it from both sides of the table. And I think in life we can be both. We can be both the mentee and the mentor, which I think is actually a great place to be, because there's always people who are trying to figure out the things that we've already learned. And then there's so much more that we're learning and places that we want to grow into.
Absolutely. What you reminded me of was some of my peers. I'm part of a program within the American Indian Science and engineering society called ACES. And there's a special program within it called the Loose Remediation Program. So it's for women in STEM who are Indigenous. And I have had the opportunity to meet so many other peers, other women who might have an IT background, computer science background, who have taken one or two cybersecurity certificate programs, and they're still learning how to move into the space. And so one of the amazing things that I felt like, okay, wait a minute, I know how to do this, try this, and I heard about this program, so try this. And it's an exchange, the sharing of knowledge, because then those individuals, those peers will come back at me and say like, hey, I'm doing this, and then there's this summit that I'm going to attend. And so there's this exchange of information of what I might never have known had I not been like, hey, try this out. And then in exchange, I learned about the different types of cybersecurity summits just for example, Indigenous gaming casinos, and learning about how cybersecurity is universal and it applies to so many different industries, academia. It's humbling, but very inspiring. And I feel like what I've learned as being a mentee is that there's no one size fits all. I've met so many individuals who have like asked me, okay, so what are you going to do for your next program? I'm like, wait a minute, I'm just getting my foot into the door. I'm not really in cybersecurity yet, and I'm kind of scratching my head. You're already working in cybersecurity. You're a director, and you're asking me what I'm doing next. And I'm thinking, okay, well, I'll share what I've seen. And her name is Philippa Burgess, and she's done this program, and boom, 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 and this worked here. And let me know if you have questions. And so it's really interesting that no one has all the answers. We just try, we learn, adapt, and we're extremely resilient. And I feel like it's been so rewarding as both the mentee and now peer mentor / future mentor / future elder in my communities that I think that it's a gift that keeps on giving.
Absolutely. I think it's great to see those perspectives and those programs and those dialogues that you're saying, like that just exchange. And I think that's the thing that happens around community, which is why community is so important in finding our spaces. I think that was the difference when I found a lot of the people I did who were in, there was initially an initial cohort, and then later we added a second cohort, was that I was just seeing individuals who were kind of wandering around. And I was like, come hang out, like come together. You don't need any pre-qualification other than you have a certificate, you're working on a certificate, you're working on a degree, you have a degree. Like as long as you're sort of committed to your path and this is the path that you want to be on, let's come together and talk about this and see what we can do to move you along. And what I think the conclusion that I've made was, and I'd like to get your take on this as well, is that you don't look for a job in cybersecurity. You become part of the cybersecurity community. You become part of the industry by joining associations within the industry, by talking about your passion for the industry, by being aware of how you can help others who don't have this awareness of just the threats that are out there and just how to secure their basic systems, and ways in which you just get involved, continuing to take courses and part of hackathons or whatever it is that leads your interest, and start to build your community, start to build your network, start to put it out there as part of your interests and part of your LinkedIn. And you don't have to say that you're an expert in any way, but it's just that cybersecurity is now folding into your conversation and the direction that you're going. Or some people who had the degree, but just were feeling like, wait, I'm not getting that first job, is still get into the community, get those relationships, get that momentum, and then the opportunities sort of open up and find you.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting that you brought that up, because I had just attended a cybersecurity conference yesterday in Silicon Valley, and it was industry focused. There were at least 100 vendors, different cybersecurity companies, consultants, sharing their work and sort of advertising what they thought their next great thing was. There are so many speakers and panelists, but the common theme that I saw is that everyone is still learning as they're going because the cybersecurity threats are evolving. There are so many research reports, resources shared because no one person has all the answers. And the best that they can do is keep learning, keep understanding how changes in technology, especially cloud computing, is going to change the cybersecurity landscape because no one has every piece of information on how it's going to change and impact cybersecurity efforts. And it was very interesting because several people made it a point to bring up the legal ramifications for some very high-ranking C-suite executives who may or may not have chosen to adapt their policies for their companies, and as a result, had been subject to different time in jail, I guess, because of things that they did not do. And so many case studies, such as 23andMe, came up. And, some of the speakers on the panels would ask, okay, so why do you think they did that? And there was no answer. Why didn't they do this? They could have done X, Y, Z. And there's no one good answer. But the common theme was, well, we still need to keep learning anyway. We need to keep evolving, keep adapting different principles, try to read all the reports. And so for someone who's on the outside looking in data science, we know that we have to learn. We know that the technology is changing. It's kind of a given. And so I feel like now I'm going to look into cybersecurity. And I thought, oh, okay, that was self-explanatory. It's going to keep changing. The landscape will evolve in the next 3 months. And so where we get our information, whether it's a research report, if it's at a conference, if it's our peers, our networking group, LinkedIn, wherever, we understand that there's a certain level of adaptability and resilience as a technologist. And so I felt like the conference that I attended yesterday really emphasized that theme. How some people approach it was very interesting. There was a lot of pessimism, to be honest, in the space, but that's okay. I felt like there's a strong contrast. For example, we had mentioned Google I/O, and events run and hosted by Google tend to have a different tone. I once attended the Google Cloud Next 23 event. I attended the Google Cloud Live event this September. And a lot of the emphasis and the conversations are about what can we do with this technology? How can we innovate? I actually did witness a live demo of Mandiant Technologies and how they were trying to counter cybersecurity attacks. In this huge hall of several thousand attendees. They were so confident that, yeah, it works. And it was a really amazing demo. So I feel like we need that healthy level and balance of pessimism and that optimism of what can we do, but we also need to come back down. Like, no, let's talk about this, who has access to the data. And so there's that balance between the different types of communities, different types of disciplines and fields that I'm not quite sure we're there yet, because when I was in the med tech / medical care field, conversations were very different about cybersecurity. And it was very much stay in your lane, they're going to take care of it. Wonderful. But now, now that I go to these cybersecurity conferences, the message is that no, everyone is responsible. Everyone down to the last individual contributor needs to be aware, because the human component needs to know these different tools and why. And so getting these different messages and being in these different spaces, I'm starting to learn that, yes, adaptability, resilience, wonderful. But also knowing that the way we talk about the cybersecurity challenges as we start to talk about cloud computing, cloud infrastructure, it's going to change, which might be great, because now there's an opportunity of no one has all the answers. We talk about women having a seat at a table. Well, there's no table. Let's just make the table. We're not going to wait. And I think that right now is the time, because what we call a data scientist today might be called the AI architect tomorrow. The terms are going to change. And sometimes you'll see a lot of influencers in the AI space who are taking a very different perspective. So why can't women tech makers? Why not? Right?
Yeah, and I think I want to kind of pick up on what you said about the idea like they're going to take care of it versus we all have a responsibility for it. Whether it doesn't matter where in the company you are, there's because of the social engineering is so prominent that if everybody can get phished, whatever it is that is the thing that they need to be aware of. And I think so. An example is I looked through my university's course curriculum. And I don't know why I decided to just do a deep dive into every major. I was just really curious about like just what are the classes that are offered throughout the university. And what I found that was quite interesting is because I had done my undergraduate there 2 decades before, is that every single major, doesn't matter if it's criminal justice, urban planning, biology, communications, all has a data science class and a data visualization class embedded in the major. And I don't know if this is a kind of right equivalency, but I remember a time where there were social media experts and people who did not know or touch social media. And now kind of we've all embraced social media. There was a time where people used computers and people who didn't. Now we sort of all use computers. And so I feel that same way that there is going to be a place for data knowledge and people who can work with data, understand data, but aren't data scientists. Like they're totally in different jobs, but they use data and they have some data analysis skills within their roles. And I feel the same thing for cybersecurity. They may not be cybersecurity specialists, like on the red team or the blue team, but they're cybersecurity knowledgeable enough that they have a useful role in helping to protect the company. Just because it just becomes part of the DNA.
What I've seen is that it could also be an entry point for encouraging more young women to go into STEM fields. If there is that sort of universal conversation of we are all going to be responsible for security of our data. And so because it is, so far reaching, then maybe this is also another path to encourage not just more women in STEM fields, and sort of change the conversations of how, going back to what we mentioned earlier, we are trapped into certain fields, into certain professions. And so I'm very hopeful and optimistic that if we can go back to that, making sure that everyone is data fluent, security fluent. And so now it makes sense that we can also have these mentorship programs to encourage just more girls in STEM and create that pipeline and really secure it as well.
Yes. And then going back to a bit of my kind of marketing background, again, that's where there was a time where I was that social media marketing expert. And then that job kind of went away because everybody became that expert. Anybody could do that job. There was just a moment in time at the very beginning where you were one of the few that kind of understood it and could explain it to people and onboard people, or they knew they were supposed to do it, but they didn't understand how they were supposed to do it. And so they just wanted to sort of happily outsource it. And that's where I feel that in some ways, what I thought was interesting is I'm doing this internship, which is with a government agency, but it's part of a larger umbrella through what they call VSFS, which is Virtual Student Federal Service. And when I looked at a lot of the job postings for what they wanted their interns to do, a ton of them wanted them to do social media. And I actually think that social media should not be underestimated, because if you're new in the field and you can find the good stories and you can amplify them and you can keep improving your tech, get your credentials, be tech proficient. But specifically as women, we're oftentimes tracked into the marketing departments and the communications departments. And having the ability to combine the communications with the tech and be visible early in your career as someone who can help with that general awareness and that general education makes you visible and brings you into the community. And then, like you said, you still have to advocate. You still have to work hard to protect your technical self and get those technical roles. But for a lot of people who will say, well, you can't get any job without cybersecurity experience, by doing the social media part, whether you start just doing it on your own or you start contracting for companies to get that role, because those are really easy jobs to get hired for, that you can then say, well, I have work experience. I was in cybersecurity, just in this role, and then here are all my credentials, and I have, and then you're skill based at that point. But you're not saying I'm starting from. And that's I think my whole point of sort of saying you start by just getting in the industry, and then letting that. But then the other challenge that we have is that for me, because I come out of communications, it's so natural for me, and I feel like we have to. And it's on both sides, because I love doing the coding. I love doing the tech. And a lot of times, like, I realize, like, the old version of me would return phone calls and emails right away. The new version of me, like, just ignores people because I'm deep down a tech hole and I'm coding, or I'm doing data science, or I'm making a map, or I'm trying to figure out my certified or not certified, professional cloud architect labs or whatever. I just would just go into, like, so hyper focused that it's hard to be social. And I think that there's a natural introvertedness that comes with people who gravitate to tech, but I also think the role of actually doing tech jobs makes you introverted because you're so have to actually do the thing.
Absolutely. I feel like when someone like, I was definitely more in the technical track when I was in school and initially in my career. So of course there were no courses on communication or public speaking. Where do you learn all of this stuff? It was not natural. It wasn't even recommended. And in the mentorship programs in the more technical space, it wasn't the most important thing. But surprise, now we're in industry. Now we're, working on teams with coworkers. And of course, you want to be a great team player. You want to learn how to communicate well and get your point across. And so it's very interesting how there's so many different paths of, whereas I might meet someone who's trying to transition into data science, for example. And I share all my advice, all the tools that I think are, helpful in the communities. And so I feel like it's very interesting that we're at this moment where we can share so much knowledge across, asynchronously on Slack or Discord, newsletters. And I think that the multiple paths of maybe initially we play to our strengths, but now we're figuring out we want to do a little bit more. And so we're going to pick up these other tools, whatever they look like, and just keep adding it, sort of packing your parachute. And I think it's so interesting that when we have the opportunity to do that, we are learning a little bit more about ourselves, but also figuring out how to support other individuals in tech, and mostly women in tech as well.
And I have a great passion for building leaders. That's something I really enjoy. So I think that I'm seeing in my own journey that it was surprising to me. Like, Google has a program called Women Developers Academy. And I was like, oh, this is great. I'll learn to code better. Oh, no, it's a public speaking course because they want more women on stages. I think, was it last year or earlier this year? There was a tech conference that had a woman speaker. I think it was like one of their only women speakers who was AI. Like, they just made her up. Like, they just popped her in the conference and was like, she doesn't exist. And they were like, well, we just can't find women who can speak on this. And I think so I can see the value. And now I'm kind of understanding, like, oh, this is like kind of who I was built to be, which is a tech and science communicator who encourages and helps to build other tech and science communicators.
Interesting. Wow. I feel like absolutely for someone like me, it doesn't come naturally to speak. I'll work on projects and I'm really happy just, continuing down that path. But I think through the mentorship program and through the Women Techmakers Ambassador program, I realized, okay, I'm going to just try it out, try to speak, see how it works out. And so when I signed up to be part of this podcast, I also applied to speak at a bunch of conferences that I would never have gone up for ever. And I got accepted. And so now I'm, slated to speak and be featured in different spaces that never would have dawned on me to try. So it's a mental shift for me, from coming from, you know, my background and my academic experience and my work experience, to actually put myself out there and get outside of my comfort zone and grow as a professional.
And so it comes back to, I'm so excited. That is the most joyful thing, when it's sort of saying, you know, what are the results? Because that's what we're now at the end of the season. It's kind of like, what are the results? We've been hanging out together for about 6 months, and y'all get my emails that come every 1 to 3 weeks, depending on what's going on in my life. And I always try to pack them with useful information that hopefully people can sort of find an opportunity or find a learning path or find something that they can sort of hook into and say, oh, okay, I will take you up on that opportunity. And just encouragement for whatever else they're up to, and just saying, keep going, you're doing great, and you're part of something, and we're happy to, you know, sort of just lend encouragement. So that's exciting. But I do feel, like I said, that was the surprise. That was the thing I didn't expect. I thought I was just putting my old career away and was like, okay, never to be revisited, like just kind of starting over. And then realizing, like, oh, wait, there's a gap here. There's a space, and I'm going to kind of find my way to fill it.
I absolutely love that. I think I really appreciate how you're bringing together this past experience and using that, because you found your voice and you're amplifying others. And I'm very appreciative, and I feel like it's so creative and innovative, and everything that we need, because the messaging, especially for women who come from, you know, very technical track, has been, you swim in your lane, you stay in your lane, you're fine. You step out, nope, you don't step out. And so it's so encouraging to hear, wait a minute, you can try this and uplift others and all of us and all the future women in tech. And so I absolutely love the message and the examples that you're setting.
Thank you. One of the things that, and it doesn't need to be a long-term thing, it can be like a one-time workshop. But again, I come out of a background in legit entertainment, media, film, television. That was where I grew up in LA. Like, I went to USC for my undergraduate, and I just stayed in Los Angeles, worked in the film industry. And so things that I took for granted is that learning how to public speak, learning how to present, were just like part of the fabric. And so I've never thought about the fact that I've taken so many different acting classes and so many different improv classes. And I would recommend for anybody, take an improv class. And when I say class, it can be just like a one-time workshop for like an hour and a half. But just the idea of improvisation it just makes you really present and really able to respond just so naturally. Your joy is their joy. Your fear is their fear. Like, the emotions between speaker and audience just flow back and forth. And even if you got off on the wrong foot, if you change the emotion, they'll change it with you.
That's so very interesting. I'm so glad you brought that up. So I'm going off tangent here, but I wanted to share that what you mentioned about being comfortable in your identity as the speaker, as the sharer, it translates well into dancing. So I also am a dancer, Polynesian dancer. Sometimes we freestyle to drum beat. And one of the most important lessons I've learned from some of my teachers is that who you are, your spirit as a dancer, shows up and it translates to your audience. How you feel, your emotions, it's going to carry in your movements. And even if you miss a step, if you get something wrong or the hand is not perfectly like that, it's okay, because sometimes that's part of it. And sometimes it doesn't even matter, because your audience picks up on what you're trying to tell through your dance and what story you're trying to convey. And so I felt like there are a lot of differences, but commonalities in that comfortableness in your identity. And I thought that was so beautiful that you brought that up with the hecklers, because you can imagine, oh my goodness, just like, what do you do? But taking it back to just don't care what, just don't care, just keep moving. Yes, and
yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, you just have to manage it. But it again, the more positivity and control that you take, the more that everybody just steps in line. I mean, and you'll find that the other members of your audience will actually protect you. I love that you do Polynesian dance, because you're this performance. And that's like public speaking is just a part of performance. And it's part of being yourself, being authentically yourself, but being your performance self. And so if you dance, just bring that energy with you when you're on stage speaking. Like, you can do that sense of comfort and that sense of performance. And the other thing I noticed that we haven't talked about yet is I have trained in martial arts for over 15 years. Absolutely love martial arts. And I saw that you also share a passion for martial arts.
Oh, that's amazing. Yes, I'm a huge student of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and going back to what we were talking about, freestyling and improv, that's all it, 100%. Rolling with the flow, and being comfortable with the unexpected, and being okay with it, being okay with failure. Which is interesting because when I was a kid, growing up, failure wasn't socialized as much. Making mistakes and failing, I felt like it was not, forefront. I had this perception of, yes, I got to try to be the best I could be, try to be correct, and a little bit of too much perfectionism. But I feel like as an adult, being part of, the martial arts community, part of the dance community, learning from failures and setbacks and minor setbacks, and knowing that you're going to just keep getting back up each time.
And actually, I think one more thing about public speaking, as you're on stages, a big lesson that I learned is that I was also part of Toastmasters, which people are saying, where do you learn to speak? Toastmasters is such an amazing organization. And
that's such amazing advice. Thank you for sharing that, and the messaging that you're bringing. Also the aspect of having the performance persona, your social media persona, and then who you are when you are an individual contributor or data scientist, cybersecurity analyst in your quiet space. You have multiple facets, and I really like that.
And then to sort of tie it all together, one of the things, as much as I talk about performance and I talk about the show, the reality is the most successful stories, the most successful creators, the most successful actors, musicians tell an authentic story, something that is true to their soul, their experience, something that is uniquely theirs to tell. So performance doesn't mean fake. Performance means amplified and incorporating the idea of an audience, but to still tell a true story or an authentic story, even if some of the details are sort of stretched a bit, because that's the nature of narrative, is that and fiction. So there's the fiction or the nonfiction world. I mean, there is a little bit of magic in performance, but the ones that resonate with people is because even in fiction, the best fiction is because people resonate that the story you're trying to tell is true.
I love that. And going back to dance, dancers who like to perform on stage also like to be in the audience and learn from others. So there's that feedback, that give and take, right, as well.
Yeah. And so I think it comes back to all, really bringing this full circle, is that we can all be mentees and mentors. We can all be audience members and the people on the stage. We can all be the introverted tech person who just wants to get the job done, is like, leave me alone because I got code to write and data to process, and the person who has meaningful conversations and has relationships and is part of community. And so I think we can all have an inner introvert and an extrovert in the same being, just maybe not at the same time.
Right. Wonderful.
So what parting advice do you have for us? What closing thoughts do you have?
So I dug up an old quote that I had witnessed. One of my community elders from Samoa had shared it at this large festival this summer. And he's the CEO of Ministry of Education in Samoa. And he said that it's really important for you to remember that your genealogy and your identity are not negotiable. And it's so powerful because I think that as women in tech, sometimes we hear different messages. As women of color, sometimes we hear other messages. And so it was just a friendly reminder of having that confidence in who you are and being authentic to yourself when you share that with the world.